Now look, I want you to listen up, and I want you to listen up very, very closely, because this 2022 recession is the best chance at generational wealth that you will ever see. Here's the thing, people like you and I, we have some pretty good advantages that work in our favor during this specific recession. Actually, our advantages are pretty massive, if I'm being honest. And I guarantee that if you take heed of this advice, there'll be a large portion of you that will go on to be millionaires in the next few years. And I'm gonna come back to exactly what the advantages are in just a few minutes and how to best utilize them properly. But before that, I really just want to set the tone and set the stage by giving you this message. No matter who you are, I don't care if you're starting at absolute rock bottom. If you don't have $100,000 in your investment portfolio within the next 2 to 3 years, you only have yourself to blame with these current conditions. Now that is the bare minimum. For everyone else, the goal should be to add an extra zero to your net worth. So if you've got $300,000 to your name in your investment portfolio or liquid, the goal should be $3 million within 3 years. If you've got $3 million, you should be aiming for $30 million. And in my situation, I'm trying to go from roughly 12 million after tax to 120 million by the year 2025. And by the way, that benchmark of adding an extra zero to your liquid net worth, that is really only if you press in and you make the most of these two advantages. Now, recessions are very difficult periods for most people because they get hit on two sides. First of all, the value of their existing assets goes down. And then second, they suffer from things like job instability, or their income from their business goes down because, they're just not making as much revenue. But for people like you and I, this is where our two advantages come in. The first advantage that people like you and I have is agility, and the second is contrarian knowledge. So let me explain. Now, the first advantage you have right now, which is agility, you probably don't even realize that it's an advantage. This is the ability to pivot. It's the ability to be mobile. It is the ability to be lean. Now, here's what I mean. The other people who are looking to succeed and come out on top during this recession, well, a lot of them have long-standing careers. A lot of them have jobs. And a lot of times these are in industries that really struggle during recessions. And these people are usually tied down geographically or tied down to, the career that they've had a long time. And unfortunately, a job is not a plan 99% of time unless you're truly with a very special company. I think having a job is a great thing if you're part of a company that really sees your value, pays you accordingly, you get good pay rises, and you're part of a great work culture. But that's 0.001% of companies, I'm just being honest. For the rest of you, your agility means that you can get into industries that other people with long-standing careers simply can't. Or there's a lot of people who are fighting through this recession that have, for example, brick and mortar businesses where they're dealing with stuff like supply chain issues, decreased revenue, and all of the other issues that come with sort of traditional businesses during a recession. But if you start an online cash flow business with low overheads and low startup costs, like I've been screaming at you guys to do over the last 5 years, you will set yourself up for success because you have the highest chance of succeeding while mitigating and lowering your risk as much as humanly possible. Now, the other benefit of having an online cash flow based business, which gives you a big competitive advantage, is basically you're location independent. And here's where this is pretty cool during a recession, because you can actually move somewhere. You could go somewhere for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. You can go to places like Cape Town. As many of you guys know, that's one of my favorites. I actually have a house out there where I spend a large portion of my year basically just to get away from the craziness of everything and really sort of focus. It's probably one of, if not the most beautiful places I've ever been to on earth. But you can go to places like Cape Town, Medellin. A lot of people, go to Bali, which I personally don't recommend just because of time zones and stuff. It can just get a little difficult. And I've just found it's a little bit more of sort of like a laid back work culture. And the point is, while you're building up your businesses, you can actually reduce your expenses by 50%, 70%, even 90% by moving to these cities, which have a much, much lower cost of living. And a lot of times actually a better quality of life too. And if you move between some of these cities for the next year or 2 years, you can actually save a lot of money while you're growing your income. So this is what I mean when I say that being agile is a competitive advantage, not only in business, but the fact that geographically you can go anywhere you want in the world. Now, another really important thing to note during this recession is please do not start impractical businesses. For example, my software company, Agency Flow, that is a 10 out of 10 difficulty. That is a 10 out of 10 company to build in terms of skill set, and it takes a lot of upfront investment. So if you're starting out, don't try to start a business like that. Or for example, Gadzhi, which is my e-commerce brand, I don't talk about it much here on YouTube, but having premium packaging like this, with this velvety inside, the finish. One of my products we make at that company is blue light blockers. Obviously I spend a lot of time in front of my computer and I like to get good sleep. So I like to block out some of the blue light before I go to bed. So this business I started 2 years ago, and this is the sort of business that suffers suffers from supply chain issues, import taxes, a whole host of stuff that is making it really difficult for business owners in industries like that. So if you want to start an online business this year and finally start making money online this year, you need to build a practical business, something that has the highest likeliness of success with the least amount of risk. Now, as many of you guys know, I have businesses in everything from SaaS to e-commerce to agency, which is my longest standing business. So I've basically done it all and created the online money making matrix, which I released in one of my most popular YouTube videos ever. I'll drop a link in the first line of description just for your convenience. Definitely check that video out. But back to my main point, which is for the next 24 months, your goal should be free cash flow, even if it's just from a side hustle, in order to really make use of your second biggest advantage. But the reason I mention agility as your first advantage is that you are in this super cool position where you can make income online from literally anywhere in the world, and then you can use that extra cash for advantage number 2. Now, your second biggest advantage during this 2022 recession is contrarian knowledge. Now, if you're the sort of person who's watching this video, I can assume that if I looked at your YouTube, if I looked at your Twitter, if I looked at sort of your other social platforms, that you are following other people in the finance space, the education space, etc., people who have a good understanding of the macroeconomic outlook. Because you need to understand that the majority of investors that you're coming up against still watch the news. These are people who are genuinely dumb enough to still tune in and listen to the people who lied to them about inflation. Oh, inflation is just transitory. Come on. After you print 40% of the world's money supply, you really think that inflation is transitory?
The US is in a recession at the moment, but it's not allowed to be called a recession.
Well, the government's trying to not call it a recession, but it's...
Wikipedia article got changed. You see this?
Really?
I mean, the audacity of it. They're even trying to rebrand what a recession means just for their own advantage. So you need to understand that the news is controlled by the puppet masters. And these are the same puppet masters that, 6 months ago were like, oh, inflation's finally kicking in. You should buy assets as a hedge, which it basically meant that they wanted you to get spooked out by inflation, even though it's been happening for 2 years at this point. They just only started reporting on it recently. And they started to talk about this stuff at the end of 2021 so they could sell their assets to you at all-time highs while they bought it in March, April, May of 2020 while the whole world was freaking out. So if you're sat here wondering, what is Iman talking about? How am I meant to build generational wealth from this recession? I think the issue is you're looking at your life and you're going, I don't have many things going for me. I still live at home with my mom. I'm not making good income. You're looking at all the things you lack in your life. And instead, let's focus on your advantages and the things where you have an edge compared to the rest of the planet and the people who are 20 years older than you or the people who are already millionaires. Because your access to a contrarian view is nothing to scoff at. Your access to a contrarian view is a very big advantage if you can make most of the first advantage. Remember, the second advantage that you have, your contrarian knowledge, you can have as much contrarian knowledge as you want. You can be smarter than the people who are watching the news, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day if the person watching the news is a doctor who makes $800K a year. Yeah, he's being, fed some BS that isn't actually true and isn't an actual indication of what's going on in the economy. And you're there on Twitter with basically sort of an ear to the ground of what's actually happening, and you're all smart and stuff like that, but you're still broke. You still can't do anything with that knowledge. So you need to understand the misinformation that the masses are fed through the news is quite frankly sickening. And you have platforms, for example, like YouTube or Twitter. I used to downplay Twitter massively. I thought Twitter was just a place for, people to commentate on, Trump versus Biden and all this crazy. Basically, I just thought it was for idiots, quite frankly. Boy, oh boy, was I wrong. There are some absolute geniuses on Twitter, and I have learned a lot from the people who are on Twitter. There are a lot of very smart minds there. There's actually a lot of very smart minds who are also anonymous on Twitter. And if you watch my channel on YouTube, you probably also watch the channels of some very other smart people when it comes to finance, macroeconomics, the things that are going on in real life. And this means that you have an advantage of knowing what to buy it, when to sell, etc., etc. Because if you tap into the right sources here on YouTube or Twitter, you'll basically have the playbook to a T of what to actually do. Now, the main challenge is actually finding the right resources, and you want to focus on people who question their beliefs, number one, and also the people who have an understanding of the bigger picture. What I mean by an understanding of the bigger picture is people who understand everything that went on in 2020. Why did it go on? Why was the world locked down for something that wasn't very deadly? Was it for people's best interest, or was it for the next step of a certain reset of some sorts, wink wink. And this is why I don't trust people who are finance bros, because they would look at the world through the lens of just like, finance, the market is doing this, blah, blah, and they don't understand what is going on in the world. Why is it going on? You know, the people, for example, just like myself, who were called conspiracy theorists back in 2020 when we were calling out a lot of this stuff, now everything we said basically came true. So first of all, I want you to learn from people who don't just look at things from the lens of technical analysis and the market is doing this. I want you to look at people who have a broad understanding of what is actually going on in the world. That's number one. And also number two, people who actually question their beliefs and do that quite often, and also play devil's advocate with themselves. Now you might be wondering, where do I find these people? Go out, search, find people you resonate with. Now, two people here on YouTube that I'm quite a big fan of. Number one, Benjamin Cohen. He is a genius when it comes to crypto. And number two, a guy called Neil McCoy Ward. Once again, he's one of those people similar to myself who is calling out a lot of stuff that's going on in the world right now. And he has a very good understanding of sort of the macroeconomic landscape, supply chain issues, what's really going on in the real estate market, etc., etc. Then when it comes to Twitter, some of the people I can recommend, Taylor Welch is one of them. Alex Becker, he posts a lot of gold on Twitter. And number three is a guy called Il Capo of crypto. So those are just a few resources that you can use once you start making money during this recession and you want to invest it and get returns that are outsized compared to most people. If you want to use the two biggest advantages that you have right now to build generational wealth, because you need to understand that you are truly living in the best time possible. And let me remind you, this is going to be a very, very, very difficult next few years for a lot of people. For the people who don't have the agility and the contrarian knowledge that you and I have, it's going to be a very, very, very difficult time. You need to understand the internet, remote work, and the democratization of financial knowledge means that the dream is honestly a lot more attainable than it used to be. I'm here rooting for you. I'm excited for you, and I'll catch you in the next video.